Hello, good to see you all. I brought good news. Sulphur Memories Alchemist 032 is out today. It's a much smaller update than the previous one, but nevertheless, it's my hopes that it will make your time with the game more pleasant. A lot of it comes as a direct result of the feedback I got, so please, if you have more of that, don't hesitate to come and give it. You can scroll down to the video description if you need a link to the game, or stay with me for a while longer, and I will tell you what the update is about. Firstly, though it wasn't the focus of this update at all, there are some graphical and sound upgrades to the game. Less important are some particles where there used to be none. More interesting is a bunch of new sounds, like the ghoul's groans, Ifrit's movements, and my favorite, the sounds of animal corpses butchered. I like how meaty it sounds, but apparently it's kiwi fruit. Credit goes to my sound designer and composer bro, Ridrick. This next part is also thanks to him, new music for the sewers. The sewers are quite an important area, considering the main quest involvement, and I'm happy to see that now it got its own soundtrack instead of the generic dungeon music. And finally, dungeon gargoyles got flesh and red eyes, to better warn the players of danger and to help distinguish them from the harmless statues elsewhere. Now we get into the important features. Some of these were pretty much directly requested by players, and some were planned for a while, simply waiting for the turn to be implemented. This is the quick harvest feature. Pretty self-explanatory in my opinion, and pretty satisfying to look at. I'm generally wary of adding too much automation to the game, but this one doesn't affect the gameplay much compared to something like auto pickup, since gathering is still dependent on the player, just takes fewer key presses. Here is another addition to controls. Specific action hotkeys. Essentially an alternative to switching between actions. There are 3 modes, and here is how it works. In the first mode, pressing a hotkey opens the target interface for a specific action. For example, you press T and aim a throw, or you press B and aim a melee attack. This is intended mostly for keyboard users, though it can definitely work with mouse controls too. In the second mode, pressing a hotkey simply switches to a different action. Not much to say about this one. And in the third mode, the action is overridden so long as you hold the hotkey. This would be pretty much useless with keyboard controls, but as far as my testing went, for mouse it's perfect. There's also a bunch of new options that you might want to use alongside this feature. Not much to say here, just try them out and see what works for you. Next, the world map. There are a few additions. Firstly, you can now mark areas as favorite. Secondly, the game will mark completed areas with a small tick. By completed I mean that you reach the final reward, not that you gathered literally everything that isn't nailed down. That much is up to you to track. Thirdly, the areas can now be removed, both manually with a button press and automatically if you haven't visited them for too long. Don't worry about anything essential getting deleted. Unique areas, as well as areas you marked as favorite, are never removed. On the other hand, your map won't get as cluttered, and your save files won't grow as much as they used to. One thing I noticed is that some people really struggled with what to me seemed like very trivial game mechanics. I won't pretend that I fully comprehend their struggle, but I will at least try to help it. Hence the new tab in the journal, Tutorials. Chances are you won't need to open it more than a couple of times, if at all. But in case you ever get confused by the game's instructions, or need a reminder after you took a break, here it is, describing everything in what probably seems like way too much detail to some, yet not enough detail to others. The next couple of features are dedicated to the absolute madmen that play until they collected all the lore. Side note, the fact that you people are doing that implies to me that you actually read all this text. That's something I have a hard time internalizing. But considering the features, firstly, an update to the inventory display, showing what kind of knowledge can be obtained from books and how much. And this is mostly to help you when browsing shops, so you know which books are useful for you and which aren't, without going through the journal. And speaking of useless books, before they remained in your inventory, waiting to be manually scrapped one by one, which could admittedly be annoying. Now, reading a book that contains nothing new automatically scraps it. It would be a bit boring for me to just list all the minor changes to costs and durations, so I'll just say there are a few changes like that and refer to the written changelog if you care about them. More interestingly, I added a couple of new items. Unmelting ice can be found in area rewards, and phantasmal mist can be gathered from clouds of mist left behind by destroyed phantasms, which makes expending potions of disruption to get rid of them a little more profitable. And yet another good piece of news for completionists is that I greatly expanded the pool of books for late game areas. As you probably know if you played the game, every area has its own selection of books available. However, when designing, I didn't really consider how many books you'd find per run of a late game area. Thus, the player could easily run out of new books to find after just a couple of runs. Moreover, trying to fill the whole journal necessitated going back to early game areas, which at this point would hardly be new or challenging. So, now each of the late game areas pool contains about twice as many books, including many of the early game books. So it should take longer for the stream of new lore to dry out completely. As is no surprise, there were still bugs in the last release. Thankfully, none of them were really game breaking, and most were incredibly hard to encounter. Props to people who reported the issues they had. I also saved around 400 MB of RAM by changing a couple of lines in the code, and I refuse to elaborate. I know I wasn't very quick with development. Part of the reason is obviously that I have a life and I don't work on the game full time. But the other part is that since the release on Steam, I started taking testing extremely seriously. I know it's early access and all, but I am honestly terrified that some players' game would just crash because of me. So I took a couple more weeks after I finished working on the features themselves, just for testing. I hope it's alright. I am very happy to have the fans that I do, few though there might be, and I am thankful for your feedback. Thank you for your reviews too, it's greatly appreciated. I hope you will all have fun playing the game with all the new features. The next update will be adding more early game content. See you!